From Hamilton Place Strategies in Washington, D.C., this is the HPS Insights podcast.
Welcome to HPS Insights, a regular podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies, analyzing the current events impacting the business and political communities. I'm your host today, Bryan DeAngelis, Managing Director here at HPS. Today, we'll dive into steps we've taken at HPS to minimize health risks to our staff through the coronavirus, while maintaining a fast-paced, dynamic work environment, and some practical steps other leaders can take to do the same in this time of uncertainty. I'm joined today by Matt McDonald, partner here at HPS, and Christina Pearson, Managing Director at HPS. Matt, Christina, welcome.
Hey, Brian.
Hi. Thank you guys for joining us. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of our decision-making here at the firm. We went remote work a couple weeks ago now, as well as kind of what we're hearing from clients, what we're hearing from some of our government contacts and what we're following in the news. And I want to talk through both kind of the planning, some of the best practices and lessons we've learned through this process, and then what we can expect to the extent we can predict it in the long term. So Matt, why don't I start with you? We've, as I mentioned, been on a remote work schedule now for a couple weeks. Walk us through the planning you and the other partners did to come to that decision and the process you put in place to make sure the firm could continue operating at the high volume it does.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually went back through my text messages to see exactly when the prep for this started. I sent a text to Stu Siciliano, who kind of operates as our COO, around, I think it was like February 24th. So around that time, that was kind of the time where it was tipping from like wow, China is really dealing with something serious to, oh, this is moving to Italy. This is moving to Washington State. This is not going to be contained. And, it was clear from some of the trajectory on this stuff that it's like that the contagion, the rate at which it spread was pretty aggressive. And so I pinged Stu with just the question of, do we have kind of remote work contingency in place if/when it comes to DC? And that kind of kicked off the conversation. For HPS, where we are a professional services firm. We're very much like knowledge economy workers type of stuff. The remote work capabilities were kind of in place already. I would say that the transition didn't really have to do with kind of technology or the work we do, or that is like more thinking around norms and thinking about how we operate as teams when we're used to kind of collaboration in a space and that sort of thing. But so then the question became, okay, what do we do when and if this happens? And I would say that the thing that we said at the front end is thinking through the risk reward for us is that the reward to staying in the office in the short term was pretty low. And given the spread is that the risk was moderate. So we had a conversation, what we wanted to do, as an example, when HPS does snow days, we just follow the guidance of the federal government. So like we don't even, the partners, if it's snowing in DC, the partners don't decide to close the firm. We just say whatever OPM says we're going to do. For this, we similarly wanted an external decision point that we could kind of talk about before the moment arrived and figure out, okay, what is the external signal that's going to say we're going to move to remote work, rather than try to calibrate on the fly of oh, is this enough cases or is that enough cases or whatever. So we talked about it and we said, okay, when cases are confirmed in the DC region, that is our signal to shift to remote work. We have an office in New York also. We have some people in California, so that there's other complications, but the bulk of our staff is in DC. And what we wanted to do is say, okay, are we going to do it when there's one confirmed case, when there's 10 confirmed cases, when there's 100 confirmed cases? What is the signal? So that, okay, at this point, there's risk to this.
And Matt, talk about why you guys went with the signal of someone in the region versus, someone in the building or someone in the neighborhood being confirmed.
Well, our general thinking on it was that if there's one confirmed case, there's probably 100 cases. And the weird thing about this moment is that, typically in crisis situations or moments of uncertainty like this, you have, you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. This particular situation, we literally have a time machine by looking at what has been transpiring in first China and South Korea and Italy and the rest of it. So
right.
It's not even like you have to kind of, okay, here's our scenarios or whatever. There's different circumstances for all of these. Some societies have more command and control structure. The demographics, behavioral side of it is different, like smoking, like there's a whole bunch of risk factors and that sort of stuff. But you can literally just go online, read news reports or look through Twitter and have a glimpse into the future of what the curve looks like for virus spread. So again, back to the contagion and back to the risk reward, our thinking was like, as soon as there is a confirmed case in the region, there's going to be hundreds of people, 100 people who have it or whatever. There'll be more people who have it who are undiagnosed. And the other thing is that by calling it early, we actually gave ourselves a little bit of leeway to adjust to remote work in a way that it happened on a Thursday. So I forget the date. It might've been like the last day of February.
I think it was 2 weeks ago today. I want to spend some more time on that and the advantages we gained from there. But Christina, let me pull you into this conversation. You spent time in your career working at HHS. You've been on the government side of things. Tell me what typically the government is thinking about and tracking, and how it maybe communicating or giving guidance to businesses in the early stages of a pandemic such as the one we're living through.
Sure. And it's probably good to think of this as well through the lens of the history here, which is that HHS really had a moment with September 11th, where for the first time, emergency preparedness really shook the entire public health system. And so the U.S. government has been very much at the forefront of thinking through various scenarios. When I was at HHS 12 years ago, we were working on a pandemic plan and scenario planning and thinking through the questions and implications to put the processes in place. And part of that was a real effort to reach out to the business community. There is ongoing yearly, quarterly communication with corporations with critical infrastructure throughout federal departments about who is designated in the lead, not just from a perspective of commerce, but also from a public health perspective. CDC has spent a lot of time really going through processes and establishing protocols that will not just help the government respond, but help businesses themselves prepare. And if you go to cdc.gov, there's a lot of fact sheets up there and practices that even now, after this process has started, businesses could think through these things and start implementing some of those suggestions themselves. And so I think there's been a lot of thinking throughout the government that cascades down into this moment. So we are prepared for it in that way, but every disaster is unique in and of itself. And so I think what really has to happen is, no matter how much scenario planning you do or how many exercises you may hold with business and government leaders at the same table, which happens very often, every circumstance really requires constant communication at all levels. And I think that is one thing that, from a government perspective, what is interesting in this moment is you really do have the top levels of government and the C-suite and others all talking to each other in real time, multiple times a day. There are set protocols, there's set interaction, and that cascades within their organizations as well, which really opens up that real-time communications channels so that the government is getting better information about supplies, about employees, about local information that may not be appearing in the media. And that really becomes key to getting an early sentinel. Even 12 hours ahead can really help you in a public health circumstance to really save lives.
Yeah, and it strikes me this obviously this is a bit unprecedented, and maybe there are some comparisons to 9/11 in the sense where, you know, a lot of us didn't see this coming, or at least to the extent it affected all of American life. But normally, Matt said something a minute ago, we do follow the government's lead. We do, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a blizzard, you know, there's some sort of federal government announcement. And I know the government's doing a lot of guidance, but in this case, it sort of struck me that businesses large and small. I mean, you were at Microsoft, HPS is about 70 employees. You know, those are two kind of ends of the spectrum. Really made this decision on their own. So maybe a question to both of you: how did companies sort of come to the decision, and at what point did they say, okay, we can't wait for the government anymore, we've got to make this decision to kind of shut down and go remote?
I'll jump in here first. I think that, again, you referenced, I worked at Microsoft for a long time. And, you know, it's interesting. I don't think Microsoft really thought about preparedness planning as much until some natural disasters happened in Washington state. And, you know, it was seen as, I think for most, we see the government as who we would look to in a time of emergency. And so I think that every business, just like every state and community, is in a different part of that spectrum of preparedness. At Microsoft, there had been some natural disasters, and they decided about 4 years ago, it got them thinking about what would ever happen if the C-suite in Seattle was offline for a couple of days.
Interesting. Okay.
And it started some interesting conversations, which has led them in this moment to be much more prepared. They already had the processes in place to communicate with their employees. As a technology company, they obviously are very comfortable with remote working to be integrated into their workplace, but they were able to also test that system and trigger it faster because they had this plan in place to be in touch with their employees in real time. And it doesn't just rely on computers. It was one thing they realized was as a tech company, they were overly reliant on their own products. And so there are actually phone trees and text trees that are set up as ways to reach people. There's also designated points that if people can't reach each other, there are designated places to, physical locations. We will meet in X city. If there is an earthquake in Seattle, we know we can get to this location. That is our place where we will meet up for certain teams. And I think a process that was frankly started 3 or 4 years ago. It's very involved. I'd be happy to talk about it more, but Matt, you can talk about our preparedness as well.
Yeah, I think for us, it's, obviously as a small company, it's easier and we're able to be more nimble about some of these things. I think that it's interesting from the HPS perspective. I think that my sense was that we were probably early in terms of calling remote work. As I said before, I think that helped in terms of our ability to kind of get set up for remote work without having the urgency of, okay, nobody can be in the office. The day after we announced it, we announced the policy a week ahead of when it actually got implemented. The day after, there were people in the office kind of getting their stuff and getting out of there. So you had some flexibility with that. I think that Christina's right in terms of the calibration of company by company. If you're primarily office work type of stuff and everybody's got a laptop, it's kind of easy to call it. If you are manufacturing or, you have there's some
service
sort
economy,
of business there's some sort of business dependency where people not being in the office equals the business is not taking place. That's just a different risk calculus. And I think that, what we've seen is that every industry and company seems to have gotten there eventually, with the exception of certain essential services. And I think that the lesson from other countries is that the earlier the better. I mean, it's odd to think for us as a firm. I also think that if we were not engaged in the work that we do, which is, paying a lot of close attention to public debates, public policy, global health is certainly an area that we've worked in. I think we were kind of attuned to what was going on in other places, and certainly being in DC, probably more so than a lot of businesses. So I think that was part of the reason that we probably had the aggressive approach that we did.
Well, let's take a break there, because I want to come back in a minute and talk about, kind of being ahead and how that set us up to be, almost better partners for our clients and some of the agencies we work with. So we'll take a quick break. You're listening to HPS Insights. We'll be back in a moment.
Hamilton Place Strategies is an analytical public affairs firm based in Washington, D.C. Learn more at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or follow us on Twitter at HPS Insight.
We're back on HPS Insights. I'm joined by Christina Pearson and Matt McDonald. Matt, I want to start back up on the point you made a few times, which is HPS was able to make this call early, or maybe it was right on time, but we were before a lot of our clients and before a lot of the businesses, not only in DC, but across the country, started to go to remote work. That felt like a built-in advantage for us to be sort of set up and at home and get our sort of kinks worked out before, everybody else was kind of dealing with the same thing. Talk through some of the advantages we gained there, some of the challenges we might have faced and overcome pretty quickly before our clients.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that everyone who is doing remote work, there is a transition that cost associated with that at the front end. And that, I think it varies by person and by firm and whatever. So whether it's, an example for us is that our media monitoring team that is critical right now, we went through the process last week of buying them all second monitors so that they can be effective at home in the same way that they are in the office. And that's something that we were able to kind of like expedite last week. I know, one of my partners was made sure to order a Keurig machine. So from like the big to the little, I think that there was an aspect of it's going to take everybody a couple of days to just acclimate and figure out how to do this stuff. And I mean, even to the point of my kids were still in school, and that also helped figure out systems at home before the full brunt of client need and family need and all the rest of it came down on us. And I think that that's done two things, is that it's allowed us to both, give some, be in a good place to help clients as they're trying to transition through a tough spot and give them good counsel on that, but also be in a place where you can look around the corner a little bit better on how to think about what's next. Because the reality is that every organization over the past week or so has just been dealing with communicating with their employees, helping people get acclimated to the new reality, just adjust. And it's really hard to think about what comes after that when you're dealing with the exigency of that kind of circumstance,
Yeah, and I think everyone's mind immediately goes to the large decisions. How do we, pull down our annual conference? How do we, change a shareholder meeting? Something else we needed to do. Even having the advantage of helping clients with how do we do video conferencing for our teams? There was kind of a head start that we got that I find many of our clients dealing now, and we're able to support that in a different way. Christina, you and I have similar experiences. We are an open concept at HPS. We have multiple teams, different teams for different clients. We've got a lot of people to manage that are now not only working at home, but some spread out throughout the country as some of our younger folks went home to their parents' house or elsewhere. Talk about how you've, been able to manage that and how you're coordinating with your team, some best practices we can share with folks.
Sure. Well, it is an adjustment, but gosh, we're just so lucky that there are so many tools available today that weren't available 10 years ago that enable us to work in a pretty seamless fashion. And so many of them are free. We got Skype, Zoom, Google Hangouts. All of us are using all of those and deploying them in real time. So the teams are feeling constant collaboration and in touch with others, even if that's virtual. But it is overwhelming, right? The flip side of technology is, I think, for teams and our clients, they're getting overwhelmed with news alerts. They have kids who are in their house and also demanding of their attention. They have phone calls coming in. It's been pretty nonstop and back to back. So one thing that we've really been talking to the team about is trying to put as much structure as possible in place so that we can best anticipate needs. We start, even though we're working from home, we start work at the regular time. We make sure to try to take a break away from your computer. You let the team know. We say to the team, I'm going to take a 15-minute break and go get lunch and step away. And then also, at the close of business, try to take one last look through all the emails and everything else and double check. And we text each other, we call each other at the end of the day and do a daily check-in to prompt and make sure we didn't forget anything. And
I think that's an important point. It's easy to forget in a remote work environment how much you get done during the day by stopping at someone's desk, by bumping into them at the coffee machine and talking through a problem, coordinating on a project. And I've been encouraged at how much our senior management, especially, but all of our employees have embraced that, have reached out for, one-on-one virtual coffees, for quick team check-ins, or, being respectful of schedules, understanding parents and others have kids now at home, finding that 15-minute check-in at the beginning of the day, as you say, and how that's worked.
And I find that people are really appreciative as well. At the start of every call, we're on back-to-back calls. But at the start of every call, I do try to take at least a moment and just ask people how they're doing. So often we are jumping right into business because we're moving in a fast-paced environment where things are emerging news cycles and constant need to keep up with the work and the incoming requests. And I do think it is important to take that moment to pause and just do a check of where we are personally and to take a breath, because that can also help you anticipate problems further down the line. If someone is being overwhelmed on one project, I can better anticipate that and help adjust the work because we have the capacity across the team. We just need to be honest with each other and in real time talking to each other about where we are with work, how we're feeling, if we're overwhelmed, if someone needs to jump in, and asking for that help.
That's a great point. And, the work comes first and foremost, but we take a lot of pride in the culture that's been created at HPS too. Matt or Christina, talk about, ways companies in general, but even our office is trying to maintain that office culture that if we are out for 4, 6, 8 weeks could really be put at risk a little bit during this time.
I mean, the things that I've been thinking about and trying to do are actually more agenda-less calls. So I would say I was better about this last week, actually, when we were remote and our clients were still kind of normal pace. This week has been the kind of client help, strategy, communication support has been a crush. But last week I was definitely just kind of burning up the phone lines with especially the directors and MDs and senior directors that I work with on a regular basis, just checking in on stuff without an explicit ask or an explicit agenda. Because I think to your point around the coffee machine is that's where some of the serendipity happens, right? And so I tried to do that. And then I think that, our kind of a community committee has done a good job with different remote work contests. They're in the midst of a show us your workspace setup, which is both, it allows people to get a little sense of what everybody else is doing. And then also, in some, it is I don't know what it is. It's like the Rorschach test of remote work is like, what does this speak about your psychological approach? I've seen like the chaos and I've seen the minimalism, and it's more illuminating at home than it is at the office. Like I didn't notice it.
It is. Yeah.
And one thing I do like, there are things I like about working at HPS about the culture when we're in the office that we've tried to also carry forward virtually. For example, 9:30 every morning, we try to have a song that plays in the office that is, a rotating member of the staff picks. And I love the idea that we are continuing that tradition where someone is picking that song and we send a link to Spotify. And I actually turn it on here in my house and we play it and dance and work at the same time. So it really lifts all our moods.
That's great. Which reminds me, I have a pick tomorrow, so I'll have to come up with a coronavirus themed good one. Let's take one last break. And then I just want to come back and kind of quickly talk about some of the longer term thinking that our clients and industry in general should be considering in a crisis like this. So you're listening to HPS Insights. We'll be back in a moment.
Every 2 weeks, HPS measures U.S. adults' feelings and expectations for the economy. The HPS Civic Science Economic Sentiment Index accurately measures movements in overall national economic sentiment and provides a more sophisticated alternative to existing economic sentiment indices. To learn more, contact us through HamiltonPlaceStrategies.com.
We're back on HPS Insights, talking now about some long-term considerations that companies and clients should be making. So most firms, I think, are settling into a bit of a new reality. We could be remote work for several weeks if we discussed, but it seems like there will be a long-term economic tailwind from this health crisis. Matt, talk to us a little bit about, companies can get caught up in the influx of news and the minute-by-minute developments, but the long-term lens they should try to take as they work through this situation.
Yeah, the things that I'm seeing, so a couple things is one is that I think right now information is at a premium. I see the monitoring that we do for clients in terms of news, official announcements, company announcements. I think a lot of leaders in multiple companies are trying to calibrate the moment to what they see out there, the guidance they get from officials, what their peers are doing. I don't think anybody wants to be last,
right?
But they're trying to calibrate how to approach it. So I think that, we say this commonly in any crisis, information flow is super important. That is definitely true now. And we're seeing that with clients and how their systems are set up to move that information around. Super important. The other thing that we've been talking a lot about with clients is documenting what they are doing at the moment, right? Thinking about the actions that they are taking to ensure the safety of their staff, the safety of their customers. How are they responding in the moment? This is a moment of truth for companies, for individuals, for government and the nation, and how, it's hard in a crisis to understand what it will be like in 6 months when collectively we are all doing the after action report, but that time will come. And it's important for people to document what they did in the moment, as a company to, if there are liability issues, when there's regulatory issues, like showing that you were thinking about these things at the time is super important. Even from an individual perspective, one of the things that I wish, on 9/11, I was a speechwriter for the governor of Massachusetts where the planes took off. And then in the financial crisis, I was an advisor to Senator McCain and we were flying around trying to get a sense of what was happening. And I was writing speeches for him on the response to the crisis. And to be honest, I wish that I had kept journals of those times of what it was like to be in the thick of that. And from a personal perspective, that's actually something that I've been doing through this, is just keeping a journal of what is happening on kind of a day-to-day basis and how we've been thinking about it as a firm and how I've been thinking about it individually.
And, Brian, if I could pick up on one thing too.
Yeah, please.
I think that it's one important fact that we need to also acknowledge is that a lot of companies have both customers and employees, and we need to make sure that we are communicating to both. And so there are those different audiences. And I think that that is part of that process here, about ensuring that you are setting up processes that you are doing a good job of communicating to both, because there are those real-time responsibilities, and you need to have those processes in place. And it's just something that we need to think about.
Yeah, and I would say anecdotally, I've seen a lot of companies over communicating, and there's probably initially a hesitation to do that. You don't know where your voice fits in this debate, but I think you raise a excellent point. It's not that you need to communicate to the media or you need to communicate to broader audiences, but your employees especially and your regular customers need to hear from you. It doesn't matter if you're a restaurant, in the local neighborhood, or you're a major global corporation. I think people are looking for information. They're looking to their authorities in their life, their employers, for that kind of information, and those communication channels are key. Well, this has been a great discussion. Let me wrap it up here. I do want to take a moment and remind our listeners that we'll have a number of resources up on the HPS website in terms of best practices. We've been sharing a number of tips of our clients as well. And Matt mentioned our flag product. We've been subscribing a lot of folks to some news analysis that our sister company is producing during this time. So reach out to your HPS contact if you're interested in any of that. Well, this was a great conversation. Let's leave it there. Matt, Christina, I want to thank you both for joining me today. I'm Bryan DeAngelis. As always, thank you for listening to HPS Insights. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Insights podcast, produced by Hamilton Place Strategies. For the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at HPS Insight and visit us on the web at hamiltonplacestrategies.com.